Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Online Business Podcast. I'm delighted to be joined with my guest who has been on my Brian Keane podcast talking all things meditation, nervous system regulation. But what we didn't talk about on that podcast was how successful of an entrepreneur and business owner this woman is. And in today's podcast, we are going to talk about passive income, not working more hours for the money so that you're not trading time for money all the time, and scaling your health, wellness, or in this case, yoga or meditation business. Kelly Smith, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Brian. I'm so excited to get to chat with you again.
Kelly, talk to us. We're going to jump straight in because this podcast has yoga instructors, Pilates instructors, personal trainers, health professionals, physiotherapists, everyone in that space. And one of the things that comes up more often than not is trading time for money. And that's the nature of being a yoga coach, a personal trainer, a physiotherapist. But there is a way to grow and scale this. Talk to us a little bit about the common mistake of working more hours for more money and why working smarter, not harder, is actually the key to growing and scaling.
Yes, I'm so glad you asked about this because from my own personal experience, a few years ago, I guess maybe like 8 or so years ago at this point, I opened a yoga studio and I made the mistake that many of us in this field are making. And all I did was I was like, great, I have this yoga studio. I can work from sun up to sundown, 7 days a week, nonstop, classes during peak hours, private sessions when we're not teaching group classes, events on the weekend, trainings on Sundays, whatever it is, right? I was like, great, now I have my own studio, so I am available 24/7, every single minute of every day for forever. And you know what I did? I filled every single minute of every single day for forever. And then what also happened is when I moved, I probably would have continued that until it killed me. And when I saw, which is like the irony, right, of a yoga meditation teacher being like, I'm going to work until it literally kills me. That's not lost on me, but also it's the name of the game. At the time, for a little context, I was in this town where I opened my studio because my husband was in medical school. So we were single income. Not only were we single income, he was a student. So that's a really high expense. Like everything was, relying on me. You also get that high of like, oh my gosh, I have a business. It's being successful. Like people are coming to class. There's demand. I want to create and do. I was also in like my early 20s as compared to my early 30s, which just has a different energy to it. Had, a little more gas in the tank then. No kids either. And when we moved for my husband's job, I had to sell the studio and we moved to a completely different part of the US. So then I went from working, my goal was to take 2 days off a month. That was my goal. It never happened, which, tells you how much I was working, to nothing, to literally nothing. And I'm not kidding, Brian, I was so sick. Not only did I realize I was burnt out, like in my mind and in my heart, but it was like my body responded so strongly. And I knew we weren't going to be in this new place for very long. And I knew what I was doing wasn't sustainable. And it takes forever to build up a clientele and to, get all these clients and students. And that's when my eyes really opened to, one, this isn't sustainable. And two, there has to be a way to be able to support my family without having to sacrifice every single minute and just say yes to every single opportunity that came in my door. And I know so many of your listeners can relate to this because they're probably doing the exact same thing, because the best way we know how to make money is to teach more classes, to hustle and get more private clients, and to have hours in for dollars out. But that's not the only way. For context now, I have 2 little kids. I'm the primary parent to them. I do other things. I also have a life. I probably work 10 to 20 hours a week tops. And I'm making more money than I did when I had my studio.
Let's unpack that, because I think that's a beautiful thing. You said a lot of really great points there, Kelly. I always think it's interesting what you mentioned there about the meditation, yoga, mindfulness as the person working 24/7. And this happens with fitness people too, where personal trainers who love fitness stop training because they don't have time to train themselves because they're training clients. And that's your canary in the coal mine, if not full-blown avalanche signal. And what I would say and what I want to unpack is how to go from that 24/7 overwhelm into building systems, either by diversifying your services or scaling up with higher ticket or building multiple offers. Like, I had the exact same scenario as you, 2016, that, you know, if there was 26 hours in the day, I'd have worked 26 hours. If there was 50 hours in the day, I was working non-stop round the clock, nearly to the point of burnout. I was making really good money, but I was working non-stop, and I was like, I can't keep doing this, because it was making me not enjoy my job, and it felt like something that I would do for free in the early days and couldn't believe I got paid for it. So there was this huge disconnect. What did your process look like from that moment in time to building out alternative systems? Was there one or two things that worked better than others? Was it the moving online element? Was it virtual retreats? I know you do corporate sessions, and there was on top of the one-to-one classes when you made that transition. But what did that look like for people listening, so they can see and paint the picture in their mind on, this isn't the way it has to be, but here's an alternative route you could take?
Yes, I will share what worked for me, and I want everyone to hear that's what worked for me. It may not be what works for you, but the big overarching answer is diversify what you are offering. One quick lesson, and then I promise I'll answer your question, Brian. I also got a huge learning moment March of 2020 when COVID hit. I just found out I was pregnant with my son. At that point, I was podcasting, thank God, because that's the thing that saved me in that moment.
Your podcast is massive for people, just to give context. You have a massive meditation podcast.
And everything changed March of 2020 because of that, because I had this passion project where I was diversifying, doing other things. That thing blew up when everything else crumbled, because the other thing I was doing was a lot of on-site trainings and retreats, and then all planes were down. I was super sick and pregnant, wasn't leaving my apartment, and so thank God I had other things to fall back on, other options there. But what worked for me in the short term in particular was I thought about, okay, what can I do that's one different than what I was doing? And I decided I was going to become location independent, which again, this is what worked for me. It's not what's going to work for everyone. What that looked like for me, because I was able to do continued ed trainings, things like that, I started traveling and doing pop-up trainings, continued ed for yoga teachers in yoga nidra, restorative yoga, and meditation. This allowed me to go, again, I also didn't have any kids. My husband was in medical school. I never saw him. This allowed me to go anywhere in the world, do a pop-up training for a weekend, a Friday night, all day Saturday, Sunday until dinner time, fly back home. I could do one a month if I was really feeling ambitious, maybe twice a month. And because I had created sort of this signature style and I was a continued ed provider, I was able to go to the location instead of being so dependent. Like when I had my studio, I was completely location dependent. I could never leave, because what if someone didn't show up for class? What if there was an emergency? I could never leave. All I had to do with this was just rely on myself. And of course, it takes time to create a curriculum, fill courses, things like that. But I started partnering with different yoga studios, wellness centers, things like that, to offer these continued ed trainings on site for them. They weren't equipped to do continued ed trainings. I had the training, the curriculum, the certification, everything came with me. So I showed up, ran the training, which I love teaching teachers, and then I would go home. That was one big thing that I added, was this ability to do a higher ticket, right? So a drop-in yoga class around here is going to be like $20, but a weekend training tuition might be anywhere from $200 to $500 per person. Of course, it's more hours, but I was able to do higher ticket. Also, it was just a different service that I was able to go other places and go to other people's businesses to do these trainings. So that was one thing I did.
Can I ask on that? Sorry, before you go to the second thing. Sorry, this is because that's such an interesting area that I hadn't considered. I knew you did those pop-up events, but I want to just unpack that for a moment before we get into the second thing, if that's okay. How did you market that, Kelly? So because of, obviously, when it's location dependent, there's a word of mouth, there's a local marketing, etc. Did you use social media, email list? Was it the podcast? Was it linking in and collaborating or joint venturing with somebody else to come in? How did you actually market those pop-up events?
It was all of the above. So what I did was I first looked at what our communities already have connections to. So I did go back to, I had my studio in Missouri. I was living in Michigan, which for any non-US listeners, that doesn't mean much. But I already had an established community there. So I would go back there maybe once or twice a year, teach at my old studio, do a pop-up. I had a connection there. Other places, whether I had friends or students, I at this time started my podcast as well. So I would talk about it on my podcast. I also posted on a website that's called Yoga Trade. And I basically, you can put different jobs on there. It's like a job posting place. It started as just for yoga teachers, but it's kind of opened up to wellness professionals. I put something on there being, hey, are there any studio owners that want to run continued ed trainings in any of these, 3 things? And that worked really well for me, collaborating with other studios, because we did a profit share. And so they would market to their students. They had this community. Also, they had teachers that it's beneficial to them to have teachers that are getting trained in a new style that then can be taught in their studio. Also, this was, several years ago. So I would run like Facebook ads, do a little bit of paid marketing in that specific region. Like I did a lot of trainings in Toronto. Toronto did really well for me. And so I would like do a geo kind of tag and run Facebook ads or social media ads to yoga teachers in Toronto about these pop-up trainings. And so I'd kind of do all the above, an email list, but my location independent business was still sort of in its infancy. So I was still growing my email list. My podcast had just started. So the big thing for me was finding businesses to collaborate with. And what they loved was that I was usually flying in from somewhere else. So it's not like I was going to go, it's not like I was local and I was going to offer this training at, the 3 studios around town. I was going to come and do this unique thing at their studio and then go home. And that was really kind of interesting for them as well. And they were able to offer unique things. And so if anyone's listening, whatever you do, if there's any kind of a designation you can get to become a continued ed provider, because that's huge to be able to offer, even if you just have one training, like one thing. It could be a half-day workshop in whatever, maybe you're someone who is, a pelvic floor specialist. Maybe whatever it is, if you can become a continued ed provider or create some kind of a workshop or a training, I think that is a great way to have a higher ticket item. You don't have to offer it as much and it helps you stand out. You can go to other people's businesses and, market online, things like that to offer these trainings.
Oh, well, from a personal standpoint, I'm going to follow up on that after this because there's definitely something there. As soon as you said that, I was like, I've been missing a string to my bow here.
I'm surprised you don't do this yet, Brian.
I
offline about this.
Yeah, 100%. To be fair, it's a little bit of a capacity and bandwidth thing as well, but that is definitely an area. So we'll touch on that offline. Next thing, moving on, because I think that's really helpful. There's a lot of people listening here who are experts. I've got one of my mentees at the minute who's expert in recovering runners. He's a physiotherapist. That's his jam. It's what he works in. But now he's building out an element of his business where he's helping other physiotherapists work with runners so that they're able to serve them one-to-one in their physical location and space. So what you've mentioned there is a ball that people can take and potentially run with in any space, whether it's health, wellness, fitness, etc. Talk to us about, sorry, I cut across you when we were talking about the pop-ups because I wanted to touch a little bit on that. Talk to us about what you were going to mention next, Kelly.
So I was going to mention that I also started my podcast at this time, and this was 8 years ago. So podcasting was very different than it is now. At that time, the hardest thing about podcasting, and you've been doing this for forever too, Brian, so but it was like getting people to figure out what is a podcast and how do I listen. That was like the hardest part.
I remember, yeah.
And so I did start that podcast. It didn't take off like where it is now until March of 2020. That ended up being my saving grace. That was one of those things that it was sort of more of a long game. I always tell people now when I mentor them, when they're starting their podcast, be willing to do it completely for free, probably at a loss for 2 years. I find whatever it is podcasting, if you can be consistent for 2 years, right around that mark, things start to change for you. Mm-hmm. So that was one thing I did. That was just a passion project, was kind of on the back burner. But then when COVID hit and everyone was at home and they were anxious and they were like, I don't know, I'll try meditation. I, for 2.5 years, had been making weekly guided meditations. So people went into Spotify, they went on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and just looked for like anxiety meditations. And the thing they were looking for in that moment, I'd been doing for 2.5 years, and they were like, great. And it completely blew up. I think I went from like maybe 5,000 downloads a week, and whatever it was, March 17th, 2020, I had 180,000 downloads in 1 week. And I remember checking those. I kept being like, there's something wrong here. I was like, what is happening? And that was just in 1 week. And I was like, what is going on? And that was one of those things that just, it was kind of on the back burner, just a passion project. But the other component that I added, again, being location independent, I did have an online component of like a membership. Honestly, it didn't do that well. I don't know, it just, sometimes you're going to try things, they're going to be slam dunk. Sometimes you're going to try things, they're not going to work. Doesn't mean it's not for forever. You could always rework it, revisit it. But I firmly believe let the numbers do the talking. There's two things I feel really strongly about. Let the numbers do the talking. Ask your audience what they want. Give them that. So I started doing retreats at this time as well. I started partnering with a company called Adventure. Anyone who is listening and you want to do retreats or you're doing retreats but they could be better, I also think this would be great for you, Brian.
Can you repeat that? Adventure.
Adventure, Adzenture. I was one of the first teachers that started working with them. I love them so much professionally. They do all my retreats now, and also personally, one of their co-founders is the godmother to my youngest baby. So there is a personal connection there, but they are phenomenal at basically taking your dream of a retreat and then making the logistics happen. So I started doing that in my kind of location independent venture. And the reason I bring that up is what I do now before every retreat, and this is how often they sell out before I even necessarily share them on my podcast. Maybe there's 2 spots left. I ask my audience what they want. I give them that. Once a year, I do a survey, say, hey, tell me what kind of a retreat you want next year. I'll give them different location options, seasons, things like that. They'll fill out the survey and I'll be like, okay, 80% of my people want to go, like in May, I'm going to Scotland, and that retreat is filled to the gills with a wait list. And I just asked people and everyone was like, I want to go to Scotland. So I was like, great. So then I did that. And then I invited all those people who said they wanted to go to Scotland in spring of 2025. And they were like, this is exactly what I want. So then they booked it. And then it was full. And I know I don't say that to be flippant. Like it didn't necessarily start that way. Like at the beginning, you'll have a little bit more hustle. Mm-hmm. But when you're creating something, ask your audience what they want and then just give them what they want. It will change what you're doing. Do a quick survey. Say, hey, I'm thinking I want to create a new workshop for you guys. Here's the 4 things I'm thinking about. Which one are you most excited about? And whichever one they say they're the most excited, there'll be one that they'll be excited about by a landslide. Great. Make that workshop. They will show up for it. They will sign up for it.
There's so much there, Kelly. I want to pull back to what you mentioned about the podcast, about things happening after 2 years. And I think it's an embodiment or a testimony to the overnight success that's been built for multiple years, because that's what happens with podcasts. Something similar happened to us in 2020 with the online business. We had a very, very good financial year because we had the infrastructure. We moved online in 2016, so everything was built when people were moving online. And it's really interesting there about the retreats, which I'm also going to follow up on off the back of this podcast. but like there's hustle in the beginning. Something I haven't mentioned actually on the podcast before. My second book, Rewire Your Mindset, which did well, but for the first year, I think it only sold 6,000 copies, which was fine. You're not winning any awards with it. Year 2, it sold over 50,000 copies, and up to date, it sold over 120,000 copies because of the flywheel effect. It was hustle in the beginning, getting it out there, talking about it, promoting it, and then it got to the point where I thought, actually, I'm really proud of this book, but maybe it's just not going to hit as many people. But then after a year, it just went word of mouth, talking about it on podcasts, and it took off. And a lot of things, you need to give them a runway of time. Your podcast, retreats, book writing, courses, programs, you need to give them a runway, because people quit normally right before something's about to pop off. But that leads me on to the next question, because you mentioned there about things being a slam dunk. Membership sites, we tried something similar a few years ago. I pulled it because I hated it. It was a load of work for crap money, and I pulled it. I was like, no, I'm out of this. But what's your filtering process for pivoting as opposed to quitting something? Like, I have my own filter that I use, but as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, it can be really difficult to know when to stick or when to twist, or when you're misaligned and need to course correct elsewhere and pivot. What's your filtering process for that?
I have 2 metrics. One is dollars. One is how big of a pain in the butt is this? Like my dollars and my personal happiness and like excitement about something. And I look at those two metrics to a degree. There's a, a point where I'll do something that's kind of a hassle if the payout is good, not in like a sellout way, but there's some, for example, like some corporate events or something where maybe we have a lot of big companies here, Target, 3M, things like that, headquartered where I'm at. They may be like, hey, like, will I go to Target headquarters? They haven't asked me to do this. So anyone listening to Target, I will do this for you. But if they, hey, Kelly, can you come and talk about, whatever, how to start a meditation practice for a lunch and learn, over the lunch hour every day next week or something. That would kind of logistically be tough for me just because of where I'm at, childcare, all of those things. But like for the exposure and what I imagine some of these bigger corporate things I know, like payment, things like that, there is a degree where a certain level of hassle can, you can make it work for a certain level of hassle. Your experience with like a membership site was very similar to mine. I felt like I was running out of ideas, like no one was really signing up. And so to me, what is an easy, like, I'm going to put this on the back burner. I also want to introduce everyone to the idea of the idea parking lot. This is a place, I saw a meme that never resonated so deeply with me other than it said, if you want to see true psychosis, open a woman's notes app. And that resonated with me so deeply. I never felt so seen of like, if anyone actually saw what's in my notes, all the different notes and lists and things, like they would be questioning, my ability to function. But one of those things in my notes app, Brian, a woman in your life where they're always making little lists and
100%. Yeah. My other half has got lists, I'd say, her lists for her lists. So yeah, I totally get it.
Yeah. So the idea parking lot is, it can be, in a notebook. I have it in my notes app, a Google Doc, whatever, where you're basically just like you'd park a car in a parking lot. You're going to, if you have an idea, because you also get the best ideas when you don't have the time to implement them, because the momentum's going, you're excited, you're in the middle of one project and you're like, it'd be a great next project, this thing. You're going to put it in that idea parking lot. Then when you have the space where you visit, look at all the great ideas you've had and make a good decision or an informed decision as to which one's next. If you're pulling things off the shelves, memberships, doesn't mean that you can't have a membership ever. Go put it in the idea parking lot, maybe write a couple of notes about what wasn't working. You can always revisit it. Save it somewhere. You can always come back to it. But to me, my filter is, if it's not doing well, again, I believe like the numbers don't lie. If people aren't signing up for something, there's something wrong with it. Doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It could be the price isn't right. It could be the marketing isn't right. It could be the timing isn't right. It could be the length of yoga classes. There's so many things I do differently the second time around. I was putting like 45, 60-minute classes, where if I was doing it again, I think I would do like 15 to 30, maybe some 45-minute classes in there. The format could have been wrong, whatever it is. People weren't signing up for it. So I was making no money. And I put so much time and effort creating those classes every single week for that membership. And it just didn't feel good. It just didn't feel good. I started to like resent it and be like, I have to work on this thing. So that's an easy pull it off the shelf. The other thing, I keep a spreadsheet for everything, how everything performs every month. Look at your data, let the data speak for itself. If there is something you're putting a ton of effort into and you've given it the runway, as you said, which as an author, only for 1 year, Brian, I personally needed to hear that. I love hearing that story about your book. But you've given it the runway and it's still just not performing, then you can make a decision on that. If you have a life change, when I started having kids, I had to look at everything I was doing, all these different kind of revenue streams, and I had to look at, I can't keep doing them all right now. Which ones are doing the best right now? What else needs to go on a pause? And so kind of these two metrics of, what do the numbers say? Like, are people into this? And also like, how does it make my heart feel? And finding that sweet spot between the two.
What's your favorite passive income stream? Because this is something I regularly ask even just friends and people that are running very successful businesses, because I have two that are opposite. One's not really passive, one's more leveraged. Like my high ticket coaching is very leveraged. I work with a handful of clients very similar to you, but the price is high and they get an investment of my time in it. And then I've got the books, and I've written 5 books, 2 hybrid published, 2 self-published, 1 traditionally published, and I could live off my book royalties based on the 5 books. And I don't have to touch any of them now. They're written, they're done, they're out there. And they're my 2 favorites because there's nothing truly passive. You're still creating content that's driving people back to these books or to these high ticket offers. But in your business, because you're similar to me, where you've got multiple revenue streams set across, and we've got similar weeks, I tend to work in sprints. So I'll have a very busy month followed by a month that's a lot easier, where similar to you, I'll spend a lot of time with my daughter, my other half, meeting friends, training for races, etc. Things that I'm passionate about, things that fill my life up with joy so that I can have that longevity in business. But that comes down to making sure that what I'm building is either scalable or leverageable or is passive in some way. What's your favorite passive revenue stream, and or i.e. leveraged, if it's a different word that you want to use?
My favorite I couldn't agree with you more. Passive doesn't truly exist. Even if it's something that you had to create once and it's kind of selling on quote autopilot, you still had to put the effort into creating it the one time and getting the autopilot, reared up and ready to go. So this whole idea of when people say like, oh, I just made $10,000 in my sleep of truly passive income, I think that's, I don't know. I don't think
it's missing a part of it. You can definitely make $10,000, €10,000 by having things set up on a back end, but it takes away the fact you've been doing 7 or 8 years of podcasting that built up this trust for someone to pay 10 grand overnight. So it needs the asterisks.
It does. It's a little misleading. So, the thing that I think every podcast episode that I make or every meditation that I write, I turn it into like 5 different pieces of content, at least 3 or 4. And I think of those other forms so I have my podcast episodes where I'll create a guided meditation, and I do monetize that show through ads, brands, things like that. I'll take that meditation. I'll also put it on Insight Timer. So I get, a couple $100 every month just by also putting my meditations on Insight Timer. I put it as a YouTube video, and my channel's monetized. So again, a little trickle of all these things, like independently aren't paying my bills, but when they start to add up, starts to make a difference in my business, especially for things during like a mat leave, things like that. I also turn many of them into scripts that other people can purchase through my website on Etsy. I had an assistant once that suggested to me, she was like, why don't you just put these on Etsy? People get digital downloads on Etsy all the time. I'd never really buy off of Etsy, but I was like, oh, she's like, you put them on your website, why don't you just post them somewhere else too? And at least a couple times a week, I'll just get a little Etsy notification, so-and-so bought your Yoga Nidra bundle. So I'll often do that. And those different things, I can turn it into, social media content. But even those 3 things of putting the podcast episode, the meditation I'm writing, recording, producing, all of that, turning it into a script people can purchase and download and use for themselves. That was my first thought. I love the scripts because I love hearing from people later like, hey, I'm a sobriety coach and I just got your 10-minute anxiety meditation and we did it in our group meeting and I got really great feedback and I feel like I really helped support my people. Like even that, like that just makes me feel so happy to hear. It's like a $3 download, but like I love hearing that I can help support other people who then want to support other people. So taking this one piece of content and basically repurposing it and reposting it over 3 different places makes a big difference. Where if I just put it on the podcast, and again, diversifying, if I just put it on the podcast, it would still do great. But then it would just sit there. So what are some other things I can do with it? And repurposing it. And then every month these things add up where I'm just kind of like, oh my gosh, what like a pleasant surprise, or I get an Etsy notification, or, and I think that's my favorite because I feel proud of myself. Of course, not all of them were my idea. Like shout out to Ariana, who was like, why don't you give Etsy a try? But taking something I'm already creating and then turning it into other stuff. It doesn't take that long to take a meditation, turn it into a YouTube video, take the same audio file, clip it a little bit, upload it to Insight Timer. I write out all my scripts anyways, so just, make sure my dyslexia didn't make it too crazy and clean it up and post it as a PDF. And I'm able to then have 4 streams of revenue for one meditation that I wrote.
I love that. The repurposing, I'm a massive fan of, even for just productivity and time. But for monetization, as you mentioned, you're taking this one thing like one of the things we had to do during COVID was the Rewire Your Mindset book I released. Part of the reason I wrote in that book was I wanted to do seminars off the back of it, and I ran several very successful ones before March 2020 and the world shut down. And then we took that and we moved it into a course and sold it as a course instead, so that it all tied together. But it was basically the same content, just fleshed out more in a deeper way. So there was no real extra work. We shot that whole course in 2 days because we had the layout from the seminar, we had the slides and the content from the book. So even asking, what are you doing in your business right now that could be repurposed in another way for monetization, you'd be surprised what will come back, because between Insight Timer, YouTube monetization, changing it into a course, loads of different options for people. Kelly, I just have a couple of questions. If you're happy to run over a little bit, just I've got, again, I would talk all day because it's fascinating, and the amount of stuff I've got from this podcast already has been massive. So thank you for that.
I don't have anything for 2 hours, Brian, so
I'm
ready.
We're literally going to roll on for another 2.5 hours. Everybody strap in. Wherever you're listening to the podcast, strap in. No, I'm joking. I'll roll with another couple of questions, Kelly, because I want to ask there, you mentioned your assistant, and it just got me thinking about investments that you've potentially made into your business. What was the best investment you ever made into your business? And again, this can be multi-layered, from mentors to courses to a book you read to a hire to something else that really positively impacted your business that was either paid or free. I normally find that, you know, when you pay attention. So it's nearly always something you've invested time, energy and money into. But what was the best investment you made in your business that comes to mind?
There's two. The first one, this is going to sound cliche. It is. And then I'll explain why. Investing in myself. Mm-hmm. The first time I thought about this, when I had that yoga studio I was telling you about, when I knew I was going to leave, I decided I wanted to start offering a 200-hour yoga teacher training to train more teachers, because I knew someone was going to buy my studio or acquire it, whatever. And when I left, basically the business would leave with me. So I thought, I'm going to train more teachers, and then this thing can stay alive. And I went to the person, I was subleasing this studio from a gym at the time. I had the top floor, they had the bottom floor. And I went to the owner of the gym and said, hey, because, you know, it was kind of expensive to get this thing off the ground. And I said, hey, do you want to kind of help support me on the front end with this? And then we can figure out some kind of a split for this yoga teacher training. Also, he was the one who ended up acquiring the studio anyways. We had kind of talked about it. And he said, no, I don't think that's a good, you know, investment. He didn't think that the training would be successful, which is fine. That's totally fine. You know, I'm not there to tell anyone what to invest in. I didn't think that was true. And so I said, okay. So I figured out how to fund it all myself, and I did it. And I had, I think 18 people enroll at like $2,500 per person. The thing that was not so great is then this person came around, you know, and then all of a sudden wanted a piece of this. And I said, no, buddy, you had your chance. Sorry, you snooze, you lose. But that was one of the best investments, like in myself, believing in myself and being like, okay, because the quote businessman didn't think this was a valid idea, in my heart, I knew that it was a good idea, and it was. So to this day, one of the like most successful, like slam dunk things that I've done was deciding to run. And I ended up running 2 more cohorts before I left. So I ran that training 3 times in 1 year before I left. And honestly, it's like helped pay for medical school. It was amazing. So there's that, investing in myself, believing in this dream, knowing it was a good idea, going forward, even when the quote professionals said they didn't think it was a good idea. There's that. Buying back my time in a way. So I have a very, very small team. I have people that just work on like particular projects. I don't have any like true employees. I hired what I called like a podcast assistant. And I've had different people in those.
This is literally how we got connected. I'm working with them now. They're incredible. Yeah. Shout out to Sam and Gauze at Podwritten. Yeah.
Yes, so they help so much. And then I have one other individual right now, Alyssa, who's there, but Ariana, who I mentioned with Etsy, is another one. They repurpose my content. So the biggest thing for me right now is time. I want to do my business, and I want to be the mom that I want to be. Also, my husband is a doctor. He works very long hours, unpredictable hours. So I don't have that many consistent hours to sit down. Brian can tell you this, when we try to schedule a time to like sit down, it's a little, you know, I'm not always the easiest to schedule with. But being able to buy back some of my time, things like repurposing that content, taking my podcast episode, turn it into a YouTube video, upload it. That takes 45, 60 minutes max. I am so happy to pay someone else to do that every week than to lose an hour just sitting there, you know, waiting for the thing to upload and making the thumbnail and all of that. And having someone that maybe works 5 to 8 hours a week on kind of these repurposing the little projects, the things that really, they don't completely turn the dial in your business, but you just kind of have to do them every week. But I don't have to do them. That leaves me time to just do what I love, which is like creating the meditations, running the workshop, doing the part that I love, and then also being able to help support someone because it's just their little side hustle. And it gives me 5 to 8 extra hours a week to be with my kids or see a friend or whatever. And so that's been my best kind of like financial investment of also getting some of my sanity back and feeling like I don't have to do it all, because that was the other thing. When I was completely burnt out is because I felt like I was the only one that could ever do any of that. And that's just not true. There are so many little things that I could easily outsource for a really low, financial investment to have someone take care of it. And also they're better at those things than me. Sam and Gaz, way better at doing that than when I try to DIY it myself. Alyssa, turning a, podcast episode into a YouTube video, I like her thumbnails better than what I did. So she's better than me at those things. So letting people be good at what they're good at has always been a great investment too, and to buy myself time back.
That's great advice for people. I run everything through the filter of, can I automate, eliminate, or delegate this thing? And that's a productivity tool, because there's certain things, like you mentioned, that it'll have to be you. Podcast will have to be you. If it's on video, it has to be you. If it's coaching, it has to be you. If it's training, it has to be you. But editing, proofreading, posting, uploading, thumbnails, there's so many things that we do in our business that don't have to be us, and there's people out there who are considerably better at it. So ask yourself, can I automate this thing? Can I eliminate this thing? Or can I delegate this thing? Because it brings you back, gives you back time, gives you back your sanity, as you mentioned. I think it's a really important filter. You have your version of that. It sounds like it's identical, just with slightly different language. But again, success leaves clues. We find our own way to these things so that we're not burning out. Again, learn from our mistakes. We both had similar burnout stories, hence why now we're like, a chill, relax, make money, serve people, do things you would do for free. And it's very easy at our stage because we're kind of out of escape velocity. So I don't want to, for people that are at the early stages who are like, oh Jesus, you don't even know, we're still grinding. There's an element of that, but know that it's not the path forever. Once you get over a certain escape velocity or out of a certain escape velocity, then it's time to scale, hire or outsource or subcontract or eliminate tasks you're doing or delegate or automate it in some way. Last question I want to ask, Kelly. I think I might know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because my answer would be podcasting. And it's, if I could keep one thing, not because I loved it, although the answer would also be podcasting for me if that was it, but because it's the main business driver. The thing that if you theoretically pulled everything else away from my business, my email list, my social media, anything that's back end, I still would have a relatively successful business by just the podcast. Now, there's a massive availability bias based on numbers there, but it's the thing that if you took everything else away, I'd be fine if you left me with the podcast, and probably my email list second. What is the one thing you would keep from a business standpoint if you had to eliminate everything else?
Numbers wise, it would have to be the podcast. But I want to take a moment to also say workshops and events are my number 2. And like right now, later today, I'm running a mini course on how to master guided meditations. We're doing 3 90-minute workshops. And not only do I love my podcast and I love teaching teachers, but doing workshops where you can, easily make $400 to $600 for an hour of teaching is something that, that is still hours in for dollars out, but I would rather, an hour in for a workshop than, a group class. I teach a group yoga class, make maybe like $50, maybe $75. That would be a close second. I just don't do as many of them right now just because of my little kids. But number wise, in terms of like effort in, dollars out, events and then specialty workshops. So like a yoga nidra and a sound bath for the summer solstice, something like special like that. And I love those 2 things. And I think it also sometimes the things that you love the most, you get the most excited about, do kind of come back. because people can feel like you're excited about it, you're invested in it. So yeah, those would be the two things, but I don't want to give anything up. And it's also an argument for diversifying because, there's probably three big things that kind of equally, I think like, oh, I couldn't really, but they're different.
That's a great way to wrap up, though, because when you build a business, one of the lines I use is build a business you don't want to retire from. And when you're jumping out of bed every morning because you're excited to do what you're doing, that's feedback that you're in alignment on the right path. And equally, as you mentioned earlier with your story, similar to mine, there was a period when that wasn't the case. And we were out of alignment, we were overwhelmed, we were burnt out, we were doing too much, and we were just constantly trading our time, knowing that's the only valuable resource that you have anyway. And there's a time and a place for that, but you want to get that as highly leveraged as possible, as soon as possible, and then scale in other ways so that you have that business that you love. Kelly, for those that are listening, and I can't thank you enough, like from a personal standpoint, I got so much from this podcast, because I'm going to go back and listen, and like I've made notes here. But for those who are interested in potentially working with you in terms of mentoring or anything along the business lines, where's the best place for them to reach out, to connect, and see if you're going to be a good fit for one another?
So I think just starting on the website, yogaforyouonline.com. I'm not, you can join the wait list for mentorships and things like that. Otherwise, I would head over there, check out trainings, workshops, that type of stuff. Also, just send me an email, info@yogaforyouonline.com. I know not everyone says that, but I'm in that inbox. I'm reading emails. I like answering people's questions. I don't always answer quickly, but that's always a great place too. And I just want to leave everyone with one thing, not that you asked, Brian, but I'm going to, take it upon myself to do this, to give everyone homework after listening to this, and think about one specialty thing you could create today, one thing that you're really good at, that you do particularly well, that's unique to you, and turn it into either a specialty event or some kind of a workshop. This thing can be 60 minutes max. I want you to think about that, write out your plan today, and see what happens when you create it. That's the hardest part, is just getting the idea, get the ball rolling, write it out today, start pitching it next week, and think about if you could add one workshop and you could easily have an additional $400 or $500 a month if you ran it once a month at different locations. So you didn't ask, Brian, but that's my homework for everyone, because I want everyone to be happy and successful and not burnt out and connected to what they're doing. I want that for everyone.
Kelly, I was a primary school, elementary school teacher for 4 years, and all my courses, my evergreen courses, have homework at the bottom of every module. And every 3 or 4 sign-ups, people will go, Jesus, you're a teacher. There's a homework in all these modules. So homework at the end of a podcast, I'm all for. People, check it out. Go check out the website, get the homework done. And again, just to open up the lines of your brain in terms of what you could do with your business. Sometimes it's one little golden nugget that you'll write down that you're like, oh, actually there's something here, and you can pull on that thread, because business is a numbers game. Ultimately, ideas, we don't struggle as entrepreneurs, type A's, self-employed people, etc., for ideas. It's focus on where to spend the time, energy, and attention. So test it, like you mentioned earlier, about asking your audience what do they want, asking your clients what do they want, and then following it that way. And it's the combination of everything that makes a very successful business. Kelly, thank you so much again. Have an amazing day, and we'll catch you soon.
Thank you.